Good morning and welcome to Empowering and Supporting Neurodiverse Talent in STEM. We're just waiting for a few more people to join. Whilst we're waiting for people to join, it would be great to have your ideas of famous neurodivergent people that you know. If you can, you can put them in the chat. That would be great. I can start off with Richard Branson as being one. He is quite famous for being openly embracing his dyslexia, and has obviously sees that as a superpower. And is there anyone out there got any other people that they can think of that are neurodivergent and have had an impact on our world? Simone Biles, yes, absolutely. There's another great example. Anyone else got an example out there? We've also got Greta Thunberg as well, made a great difference in terms of ecological campaigning. There are plenty of examples out there. Yes, Sir James Dyson, brilliant, dyslexic and ADHD. Fantastic examples there. So we've got a few people that are probably still coming to join us, but we'll come with a bit of housekeeping to start with. So this webinar will be recorded and shared after the event. Delegate sound is restricted during the presentations, but you are welcome to have your video on. If you have any practical questions regarding sound and video, please ask these questions in the chat and a member of our team will respond. You can ask questions for any of our speakers throughout the event in the Slido Q&A function. And if you can put their name first before the question, if it's specifically for one speaker, that would be great. We will share the Slido link in a moment. Sound will be unlocked for the Q&A, and you can raise your hand and you can ask a question in person if you'd like. And please use reactions and share your thoughts in the comments throughout. That would be great to have your engagement throughout, so we know there's people out there. And if we move on, we'll do a little bit of accessibility as well. So for Teams webinar, you can use the live chat captions in the meeting. Go to your meeting controls at the top of the screen and select More, Language, Speech, turn on live captions. And then for Slido, it is possible to use Slido with screen readers if you are using an Apple product or Google Chrome. VoiceOver in Apple apps, you can use a built-in screen reader on MacBook, iPhone, iPad. And there should be some links coming on in the chat in a minute for you to be able to access these. There's also a screen reader for Google Chrome, screen reader extension, also a link coming in the chat in a moment. And using Slido with the keyboard, the primary functionalities such as using Slido, asking questions or voting in polls are accessible while using it on a desktop computer or laptop. Again, more information should be coming in the chat in a moment. Next slide, please. So here we go for your Slido link. So if you could use your phone, you can access that, and there'll be the Q&A, which will be there throughout. And we'll have a few interactive questions for the audience that you can engage with the discussions later on in the event. Next slide, please, Shamini. So just to give you a little introduction to myself, I'm the WISE Delivery and Engagement Specialist here at the IET. And just to give you a little bit of background of myself, I'm dyslexic and I was diagnosed in 1993. I also have a daughter who is dyslexic, who was diagnosed at primary school. And she's in a friendship group of 10, and 7 of her friends have now been diagnosed as neurodivergent, which is very different from when I was at school and I was the only one with extra time in the exam hall. So I think I feel we have come a long way, and it's fantastic that we're able to get together and discuss these areas so openly. So I would now like to introduce our first speaker. Well, I'll give you a little overview of the agenda first and what's coming up. So we've got Daisy Marsh coming up from the IET, who will be giving you an understanding of neurodiversity. And then we've got lived experience from Pip Ross, followed by supporting neurodiverse talent in the workplace. That's Caroline Norris. And then we'll have a bit of an interactive discussion and more questions to our speakers and a Q&A. And we're looking to finish at 12. So without further ado, let me introduce Daisy Marsh, Senior EDI Executive from the IET. Welcome, Daisy.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you very much all for your time today. I'm just going to quickly share my slides so you can see what I've got to share with you all today. Okay. Hopefully you can all see that. Everyone can just give me a little thumbs up, that would be really helpful, just so I know you can. Oh, brilliant, thank you. I can see them popping up at the bottom. Lovely. So we are going to talk a little bit about understanding neurodiversity. So a little bit of an overview on what neurodiversity is, some of the traits that can be associated with being neurodivergent, and some examples of what that might be like in real life, sort of real life terms. So let's start with the basics. So what even is neurodiversity? And I understand that people watching this today might have a slightly differing level of understanding as to what neurodiversity is. But for the benefit of everybody, we'll start with the basics. So definitions. So moving on to my lovely definition umbrellas. On the left, you can see we've got the term neurodiversity, and then on the right, we've got neurodivergent. So what's the difference? Well, the term neurodiversity basically refers to all the different ways that our minds work and process information. And the term represents the full range of these thinking types, and these thinking types are known as neurotypes. So we are all neurodiverse. Everybody on the planet is neurodiverse, and we all have our own neurotype. The most common neurotype is neurotypical, and that makes up about 4 in 5 people, so about 80% of the population. But the neurodivergent refers to individuals who have one or more of like minority neurotypes. And these minority neurotypes can include things like ADHD, autism, dyslexia, all the little things you can see there underneath my lovely umbrella. But it is important to note there are actually other ways that someone can be neurodivergent. So things like mental health sometimes falls under that umbrella of neurodivergent. So OCD, anxiety, depression, that sort of thing. But you can also be neurodivergent from an acquired brain injury, from a stroke or an accident. But for the sake of today, we're going to be focusing on these ones under this umbrella. And finally, we're going to have a quick look at some of the statistics around neurodiversity. So let's have a look at those. Okay, so does anybody want to have a guess before I put it up on the screen? And hopefully you will have been paying attention on the last slide. Does anyone want to have a guess on how many or what percentage of the population are thought to be neurodivergent? And I'll give people a few seconds if anyone wants to have a guess. Lee was in there, or Robert was in there straight away with 20%. That is correct. That is correct. So we think, or we assume that there is about 20% of the population who are neurodivergent, so about 1 in 5. So really a significant portion of the population, and some people actually believe that this figure may even be higher. So then let's have a quick look at some of the most common neurodivergent conditions. So these are our top 3, so to speak. So we've got dyslexia, which is our most common neurodivergent neurotype, and that makes up about 10% of the general population. ADHD is the second most common minority neurotype, making up about 5% of the population, and autism is the third most common, and that makes up between 1 and 4%. And then co-occurrence between neurodivergent conditions is actually really, really high, and there's quite a lot of crossover. So 2 of the most common crossovers we see in neurodiversity is we see autism and ADHD. So over half of those diagnosed with autism also show signs of ADHD. And we see a similar thing with dyslexia and dyspraxia. They're often diagnosed together, again, with about half of the people who are diagnosed as dyslexic showing signs of dyspraxia. So there's a lot of crossover. But we also know that there are barriers to leadership and progression for neurodivergent people. So we know that only 3 in 10 working age autistic people are actually in work. And that's not necessarily because they don't want to be in work. A lot of the times this is because of workplace barriers and neurotypical ways of working that are inaccessible to these people. We also know that individuals with ADHD are 60% more likely to lose a job for similar reasons, for neurotypical ways of working that are sometimes incongruent with the ways that other people maybe want to work. And then moving on to the final stat, which is only 14% of dyslexic workers feel their organisation values dyslexic thinking. So even though you can pop it on your LinkedIn now as a skill, we're not seeing that translation into the real world of people seeing it as something really valuable that can be brought to a team. So with these in mind, what is it really like to exist as a neurodivergent person in a neurotypical world? Well, that's a big question, but I've got a few videos, a couple of short videos that I want to share with you that attempts to give us a bit of an insight into this, and these are some really good examples. The first video on screen now is from the National Autistic Society, and what it does a really good job of is showing how lots of little small things throughout someone's day can have a really big impact on someone who is neurodivergent, and they can even make leaving the house like an anxiety-filled experience that's really challenging. So I'm going to play this, and while I do, while you're watching it, I want you to just have a little think about what you notice about her experience and how the video makes you feel. And then we'll have a little discussion about that, or people can pop in the chat any feedback they've got. Before I play this, just a very quick trigger warning. There's lots of different sounds, and there are some minor flashing lights in this video. So if those affect you, you might want to mute or sort of, minimise your screen. But hopefully we can all get involved and watch this. So I will play it now and stop talking. Okay, hopefully everyone was able to hear that. But yeah, is anybody willing to share how that made them feel and what they noticed about her experience? You can either pop your hand up and say it, or you can pop it in the chat, whatever works for you, and I'll just give you a few minutes. Yeah, overwhelming, exactly. Yeah, definitely. I think when I've run this session previously, people have said things like, even though the people are probably not laughing at her, it sort of seems from her perception that everyone's sort of looking and laughing at her, sort of trying to overcome these big sort of sensory experiences that she's having, and that really compounds it. Intensified awareness, exactly. Yeah, everything is intensified, isn't it? And it's quite overwhelming just to watch. So imagine how it would feel, obviously, to be the person. So yeah, brilliant, thank you. And anybody else want to add anything before we move on to the next one? No, that's fine. Okay, right, let's move on to the next video. So this video explores ADHD, so it's an ADHD simulator. And again, I think this is a pretty good example. Obviously, it's not perfect, and I should say that everybody experiences neurodiversity differently in their own unique way. But this is a pretty good example, I think, of how it can feel with ADHD. So I'll play this now, and again, while I'm playing it, I'd like you to think about, what you notice and how it makes you feel. Okay. So again, yeah, anybody want to share how that made them feel and what they noticed about that? And I'll give people a few minutes again. Exhausting, yeah, absolutely. And it's funny that someone pointed out when I ran this before, tired, yeah, exactly. She originally went to the kitchen to eat something and never even ended up eating anything in the first place. It's going on these sort of side quests, I think some people call them, when you're trying to get something done that can really be quite debilitating and you end up not getting the original thing done in the first place. But yeah, thank you very much for sharing that. Does anybody else want to add anything quickly before I move on? Or are we all good? We're all happy? But yeah, those are just to give you a little bit of an insight into how it may be, because it's great to hear about it, but it's much better to sort of see it in practice. So anyway, talking more about neurodivergence and what it can look like, I'll move on. So of course there is no one way to be neurodivergent, as I've said. Neurodivergent or neurodivergent traits will vary between every individual. But on screen here, and I've already clicked one in, I have a few common traits that can occur or we see commonly across multiple neurominorities. So the first one, and this isn't really a trait, but it's something that can be really helpful for neurodivergent people, and that's a preference for regular check-ins. So these will just help someone who at work maybe might struggle with disorganization and time management, really helps them to keep on track and not go off on a tangent and a side quest, as we saw before, and make sure that everything is getting done to the standard and rate that it should be being done. So that's helpful. The next one is disorganization or very, very strong organization. So this really depends on various things, including the type of neurodiversity that they have or neurodivergence that they have, and also the type of person that they are generally. So someone who has ADHD, for example, might really struggle with their organisation and find that they lose things all the time, or they miss appointments and things like that. But someone with autism, for example, might be extremely rigid and like to have a structured day and structured, very strong organised day. But it really depends on the individual. And to be honest, on the flip side, you could have someone with ADHD who is extremely organised because they've worked to try and counteract some of that throughout their life. So again, it really depends, but it's more about those extremes that we see. And then moving on to the next one, which is communication differences. And I put differences instead of difficulties because I think it is differences. So depending on the sort of neurodivergence that you have or that the person has, they might choose or prefer to communicate in different ways. So someone with dyslexia who struggles with reading and writing obviously might prefer to speak and might be really, really skilled at it as well. Whereas someone with autism who might have some social anxiety might prefer to write things down. Or might struggle to think on their feet and things like that. So it's really about those differences. And actually, the IET did some research back in 2023 around neurodiversity in engineering, which I'll talk a little bit about in a bit. And we held a series of focus groups, and there was one focus group where not a single participant spoke. All the interaction was done via the chat function, and that actually ended up being one of our most insightful sessions. So it's really important to recognise that even though it's a communication difference, it doesn't necessarily mean it's worse or not as helpful. Sensory sensitivities, so this appears across multiple different neurodivergent conditions. So things like, essentially anything is associated with our senses. So they can be sensitive to things like bright lights, strong smells, certain tastes and textures, different things like that. So, as we saw sort of in the train video, the first video that we showed, those things can have a real big impact on someone who is neurodivergent. Low self-esteem and anxiety. So this won't affect everybody, but it can be a problem for people who are neurodivergent, because I think part of it comes from growing up around your peers who maybe are finding things really easy in certain places and you're really struggling with these specific things. It can be quite disheartening to see that, and it can make you feel as if you're not good enough or you're different. So that can lead to feelings of anxiety and low self-esteem. Vulnerable to distraction. So again, we saw a little bit of example of this in the ADHD simulator video, but really it's that being very vulnerable to any sort of external stimuli that can throw us off our focus or throw you off your focus. So it's really important when you're working with someone who's neurodivergent to try and minimise those external distractions. Well, it's important for anybody really, but it's extra important in this case. Stimming or tics. So if you're not familiar with the term stimming, essentially stimming is an action, a small action, or it could be a verbal thing, it could really be anything, but it's a small action that is done to self-regulate emotions or stress, but also self-soothe. It can be done out of excitement as well, and it can be literally anything. So it could be things like hair twirling, it could be things like clicking your fingers, it could be things like repeating a phrase over and over again. It really could be anything. And that differs slightly to tics, which are mostly associated with Tourette syndrome, and that those are more completely involuntary vocal and physical sort of exertions that the individual can't control. So those are slightly different. And hyperfocus. So again, not everybody who is neurodivergent can hyperfocus, but what hyperfocus does is it allows people to get a huge amount of work or studying done in a certain amount of time, especially if the topic that they're talking or looking into is something they're actually interested in. So people can hyperfocus for hours and hours to the detriment of their personal life in terms of not going to the toilet and forgetting to eat. So it can be really great, but it can also be, you have to be mindful of that when you get into that hyperfocus zone. So there's a few of the things that we might see, but again, of course, there's many more traits that we would see. So moving on to a little bit about perceptions. So we know, and I'm sure you are familiar if you have been around this discourse around neurodiversity, that there are some negative perceptions that still exist around neurodiversity. And one of the things that I hear the most, and I'm sure some of you may have heard this as well, is everyone is neurodivergent these days. And is that true? Well, I think I'm going to give you an example which hopefully will make you question that a little bit. So yes, in recent years, the number of people identifying as neurodivergent has increased quite rapidly, and in some cases people will see this sudden increase and will just declare, oh, everybody seems to be neurodivergent these days. And what that does is it sort of dismisses the validity of the diagnosis, but also kind of suggests it's becoming a trend. But back in the olden days, back in the early 1900s, the same backlash was seen around being left-handed. So as people started to learn more about left-handedness, before it was actually considered as a disease, and some people even associated being left-handed with being evil or bad or dishonest. But as people understood, I've started to understand left-handedness, and more people came out and said, actually, I'm left-handed and I've just been pretending to be right-handed. And because of this stigma, the rates of left-handedness increased, and people who were left-handed no longer had to pretend. So the percentage of left-handed people increased, but then it did eventually plateau to a new normal. And the same is expected to happen with neurodiversity. It comes, this sort of increase in awareness has really helped to boost a lot of people who maybe didn't understand about neurodiversity when they were younger, or the perceptions of what it was like to be neurodivergent were incorrect. Now we learn more about it. A lot of people are saying, oh, actually, that's my experience too. So it's very interesting, but as you say, nowadays it would be very difficult or very unusual, to meet someone who is anti-left hand. So we're hoping that the same attitude shift will happen around neurodiversity over time. But is there anything that we can do as individuals to help speed up the process of acceptance and challenge some of these perceptions? Yes, there is. Well, there's lots of different things we can do, but here are 5 things to get you started. The first one is exploring neurodiversity resources from reliable sources, which I can't always be easy to find, but there are lots out there. So the IET, I'm going to do a bit of a shameless plug here, but beyond the IET's own resources, the Business Disability Forum has a huge range of resources and info, and there's also some really fantastic TED Talks on the topic, which I'm happy to share with people later on. The next one is speak to neurodivergent people, but make sure that if you do this, that person is open about their diagnosis or they're neurodivergent. Don't go and speak to someone you think might be neurodivergent and ask them, because that could not end well. But the best source is always going to be the horse's mouth, obviously. So speak to neurodivergent people in your life. If you don't know any, I bet you do. But if you can't ask them and they're not sure themselves, then look online for examples of lived experiences, because there's loads out there. The next one is self-reflect, and I don't mean go stare at yourself in the mirror, but I mean reflect on your own behaviour. Is there anything you could be doing to be more inclusive, more accommodating, or more mindful of other people, essentially? The next one is explore neurodiverse media, so read books and watch films that portray neurodiversity. But remember to watch with a critical eye, because some are good, some are bad, and some are downright offensive. So if you're unsure, look at the reviews, because that's a great place to look. Or you can ask someone, you can ask me, or you can ask someone else as a representative of understanding of neurodiversity to send over some recommendations. And finally, practice compassion and understanding. Do I really need to practice these things? They should come naturally, but yes, we do need to practice these things, because it is easy to become caught up in our own everyday experiences and preferences, that we forget to consider that others might need things differently, slightly different to us. The more we consider this, the more we become a safe place for other people to express themselves without fear of judgment, essentially. So back to more shameless plugging. Speaking of resources, I've got a few from the IET to quickly share. So at the top here on the left is our neurodiversity in engineering report, which I spoke a little bit about earlier. And this report essentially explored the instance and experience of neurodiversity in engineering and technology. Following that report, which we made a few commitments within in terms of making the industry and the IET more inclusive, we've developed the resource next to that, which is the Understanding Neurodivergence at Work Toolkit. And this is really a toolkit to support various different stakeholders and individuals on how to support neurodivergent people at work. To supplement that toolkit, we also gathered a series of anonymous case studies, which you can go and see on our website. I know we've got some links which I can add in later if not, but there's a few case studies that you can go and have a look at of real life engineers who are neurodivergent and talking about their experiences. Below that is a webinar that we put on, I think it was in 2024, about neuro inclusion at work, and Caroline Norris, who is one of the speakers today, was actually part of that event. So that was a really great broad look at how you can support neurodivergent people, featuring people who are neurodivergent, but also people who manage neurodivergent people. So yeah, it's great. If you want to, I'll pop a link in the chat later on if you want to go and have a look at that. And then the final thing I'm going to say is this, at the very bottom there are some pledge cards which we developed in connection to the report. And essentially these are just little social media cards that you can put on your social media channels, pledging your commitment to be more neuro inclusive. And I think that's the final bit of my shameless plugging. So yeah, thank you very much everyone for watching, and I'll be happy to take any questions whenever it's time for them. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Daisy. It was great to have such a in your shoes films of experience there. Thank you so much for that. I actually meant to ask earlier, and this might be a dyslexic thing, if there's anyone that's happy to share if they are neurodivergent that are watching out there, please post that. And if you want to, but also if you're approaching this from an organizational perspective, and if you're also looking to on examples of how you can be a better ally and support colleagues, it would be great just to know why you're attending today, and if you could post that in the chat, that would be brilliant. But here to share her experience of being a neurodivergent is Pip Ross, her managing director of WS UP Advisory. What's up? Sorry, Pip. Great, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you. So I'm Pip Ross, and I'm gonna share some lived experiences of being a neurodivergent, so dyslexic and ADHD, and a perimenopausal working mum. So by way of introduction, I'm currently managing director of WASSUP Advisory. We're a small consultancy working in water in Africa, but I also spent the majority of my career, over 18 years, with Atkins Realis. So just to talk you through a bit of my journey, I've always suspected that I was dyslexic, but I think there was a lot of stigma when I was young, and it was kind of deemed people that were thick. So I definitely masked, but I mean, I really can't spell some really simple words. I find it really difficult to take in information, particularly non-fiction, which I think I was really embarrassed about when reading. So yes, thank goodness for podcasts and audiobooks these days. But it wasn't until I was doing my doctorate, so in my early 30s that I got a diagnosis from for dyslexia, and that was through the university, and also got some support, things like proofreading, reading aloud, getting some software to read aloud. It's much easier these days because we often have things like that built into our standard software, but at the time it wasn't as common. And at this point, I don't think I'd really even heard of ADHD, or not how I view it now. I'd probably had the standard idea that it was naughty boys that commonly had ADHD. It wasn't really on my radar. So I have always been, I like to say, a whirlwind of organized chaos, and I've kind of felt that served me well through my career. I could spin busy work, being a mum, social calendar, and whatever fad I tended to be into at that time. And I think there were probably, there were evenings or days when I was too exhausted to even speak. But generally, I thought I was fine. I was fine, or I thought I was, until I wasn't. And I think this was really a big shock to me. I was anxious, feeling panicky, brain fog. At the time I was working at Atkins Realis. I was managing a sustainability environment team, quite big, about 160 people, but I felt like I just couldn't function in the way I had before. And really, that was a big welcome to the menopause for me, I think. And at the time, I just wasn't coping well. For me, it started, I think, about 41. I think it took me a couple of years to even realise those symptoms could be related to perimenopause, and probably after that, about a year of discussions with my GP, until bang, I hit the magic number of 45, and the doctor said to me, well, you can either try antidepressants or HRT, which I think is often common feedback. I've heard some real horror stories of people being diagnosed with things like early onset dementia. So I chose HRT, and that seemed to ease some of the symptoms. And the reason I'm telling you this now is because I think there's a really big link about change in hormones and hormone fluctuations and severe neurodivergent traits. I'm talking from an ADHD perspective, but I think there's probably links to other traits, to other conditions as well. So HRT seemed to ease some of the symptoms, but I still didn't kind of feel right, and struggled on, but kind of thinking, oh, I'm fine. But this time, and actually through some of the work of the Atkins Realis Neurodiversity Network, which I found really helpful and insightful, I did start to wonder if maybe I had ADHD. So I went to the doctor. I probably cried quite a few times, and they said they put me on the waiting list for a diagnosis, except they didn't actually do this. Then I asked to go down the right to choose route, which is where they will pay for, because there's such a long waiting list, they'll pay for a diagnosis privately. Except then they decided they didn't support that system, and so this kind of made me kind of spiral even further. And I think what's really hard with this is you're trying to fight a system when you're feeling most vulnerable and struggling. At the time, I couldn't even remember the name of my son half the time. So finally I did get onto the waiting list, but there were sort of two events that led me to take real action. First was I was just out for friends and family lunch. I just burst into tears and crying on and off for about 3 days. And even then I kind of just shrugged it off. I'm fine. It was just a bit of a moment. And it wasn't until I spoke to a friend and she said, I think maybe that was a bit of a breakdown, that the seriousness of something like that really kind of clicked with me. And the other thing, which is not so dramatic, but I always used to pride myself on kind of conjuring up big meals from, a leftover lump of cheese and half a courgette. But I was kind of frequently just looking in the fridge and having no idea what to do, feeling completely overwhelmed. The fridge was totally full, but couldn't deal with it, and I would just have a piece of toast. So I thought I must be depressed. So I got referred to a psychiatrist after lots of crying on medical professionals, and I because I'd suspected, I found one that I thought that specialised in neurodiversity, and then skip a few months, tears, anger, relief, all of those emotions. I got a formal diagnosis for ADHD. And I think having a diagnosis has been a roller coaster of emotions for me. I think I was probably a little bit embarrassed at the start. I think, as Daisy said, there's a lot of, oh, everyone has ADHD these days, or everyone's a bit on the spectrum, which makes me so angry. But it has mostly been very positive. I think I understand myself better. I'm kinder to myself, and I kind of know all the things. For me, it's about kind of trying to regulate myself better, all of the things that I should be doing, even if I'm not actually that good at doing them all of the time, that I should and can do to help myself. And that feeling of having a bit more control has been quite a powerful change for me. I have been angry as I sort of dived into the rabbit warren of ADHD literature, podcasts, and influences. I also realised that the majority of them were men. I felt bombarded with information, but I found it very hard to find sort of in-depth or evidence base of relating to women and hormones. And I really think that that change in hormones, if I look back through my life, I can see really how hormones have really had a big impact on the symptoms and the severity of my ADHD symptoms. And I'll leave it right there and talk a bit about more of the link between being hormones and neurodivergent people later in the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing so honestly and candidly your experience. It's yeah, I relate to a lot of that. So yeah, thanks ever so much. So next to share what Atkins Realis is doing in relation to supporting neurodivergent colleagues, we have Caroline Norris, who's Associate Director at Atkins Realis. Welcome, Caroline.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Good. So as you just said, I'm Caroline Norris. I'm an associate director at Atkins Realis. I've worked at Atkins Realis for 20 years, alongside Pip, who just spoke, and it's lovely to hear her speak so candidly about her experiences. In 2019, I worked to set up, and then for the last 5 years, co-lead the neurodiversity network within our organisation. And I'll be honest, the reason I did it is because I have a nephew who at the time was 14, who is very, very funny, can make up his own jokes, and they're very funny jokes, and is incredibly good at playing the piano. Like the sort of, you just want to watch and listen to him play all the time, and he's absolutely fabulous at math. But because he's autistic, there is really barriers for him to get work placements and to get into the workplace. Everyone was sort of worried that he might never actually achieve a sort of level of independence. At the same time, and in parallel, I was working in an engineering organisation, where what we need is really talented people that have attention to detail and have creative talent at the same time. So it seemed kind of obvious to me that we needed to do something in the workplace to break down those barriers and allow neurodivergent people to enter. Once I did set up the network, so many people contacted me to say they were so happy that we were talking about neurodiversity. And one of the things I would say in the course of that 5 years is having been the greatest privilege to watch is neurodivergent terminology becoming part of everyday conversation. People are talking about it, and there's so much importance I put by having conversations around neurodivergence. So I'm really, really grateful to be invited here today, and I'm really proud that we're having this discussion. Anyway, I've picked up some old slides that we put together a few years ago, and sort of started with why is neurodivergence important to Atkins, or neurodiversity is important to Atkins, largely because of that thing that has been mentioned already by Daisy as well, about focusing on people's strengths rather than their challenges. So if we talk about people with dyslexia, not as people who can't read or write or struggle with reading and writing, but people who have, and I am grouping traits together, I hope nobody minds that, but people who have creative thoughts, people who have people who are autistic, not talking about them as being unsociable or afraid of sort of social interaction, but actually people who can avoid normative thinking, because what we need as a business, as we sort of ride these global changes that are happening, is people who don't have just slightly different to normal thoughts, but actually people who really, really, really push the bounds of innovation and progression. So could you go on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So one of the first things we had to look at was, what are the challenges? What are those barriers? And really one of the biggest ones for me, and potentially still is, although we're working on it very hard, is the hiring process. Really, really simple thing within our hiring process, where you had to identify yourself as disabled before you were then allowed a drop-down menu to say were there any reasonable adjustments that you needed during your interview. Now, I think the majority of people on the call will admit that your neurodivergence, whilst technically is termed a disability, very few people will self-identify as being disabled. So that straight up was a barrier to the interview process, and we could knock that on its head quite quickly. And now we don't have that tick box process. We go straight into, is there any reasonable adjustments you might need? Promoting that reasonable adjustments process as well, so that people know what they have access to and know what they can ask for, and know that they don't have to disclose any form of neurodivergence or even self-identify as neurodivergent to get the reasonable adjustments they need to maximize their strengths. Biggest one that we worked on over time is culture. As I said before, I think terminology that we used around neurodivergence could often be quite negative. There was often a lot of preconceived ideas as to what neurodivergence meant, and we've done a lot of role modelling, essentially. So Pip is a great example of a role model within our business who was willing to stand up and say, I am neurodivergent, and this is why I'm great. We've done that throughout the business, so people that people know, so having senior people, mid-level people, junior people just talk about their own journeys, but also then point people in the directions of where, as Daisy said, is neurodivergent representation in the wider public arena. I don't know if anyone knows, but Sir Robert Buckland did a report. He used to be our Justice Secretary during the Conservative government years, and he both has an autistic daughter and noticed within that justice system the disproportionate number of people with neurodivergent conditions that were in prison. And he did a study a year or so ago, I think now, with a charity called Autistica, into what the barriers to employment were and how businesses could be more neuro-inclusive. One of the biggest recommendations, I think there were 19 that he made, but one was around role modelling and how important role modelling is. And then we've also worked on an environment, and I say I put these slides together a few years ago, but actually this has stayed our structure for how we approach neuro-inclusivity across the business over the course of the last 5 years that we've been looking into it and addressing it. We work in open plan offices. I don't think anyone had really thought through the impact on people with sensory sensitivities when they had that remit that we had to have an open plan office. So we put together a neuro-inclusive office design guide that basically allows the balance between open plan offices and giving individuals some choice and control over their own particular environment, their own lighting, their own noise levels, their own heat levels, their own clothing, for example, so that people can adjust to suit their own needs. It's actually a guide that Daisy has picked up and put in their neuro inclusive guides as well, that she shared a link to there. So I'm really pleased about that, because that is super available to anyone that wants it, and anyone that wants some guidance on how to make their office spaces more neuro inclusive. We're working now and have been, but more quietly, we're working now more intensely on the online environment, because I think we're all very aware that we have so many more tools online now that can also potentially be seen as distractions. So how do we manage our online environment to enable neurodivergent people to thrive? Yeah, do you want to go on to the next slide? This slide is just the same slide, but listing out all those different things that we've been doing as an organisation to address some of those barriers that we saw. As I say, I don't think the main barrier that I think I would now find as a network lead is around disclosure. And this is the challenge for us going forward, is how to encourage disclosure. I do think it's still about role modelling. I think that plays a really key part in improving that culture. But I would welcome from anyone else any recommendations on what we can do as an organisation to encourage more disclosure, both formal disclosure and informal disclosure, because I think that's still a hurdle that I'd like to get over it and accelerate change over the next few years. So that's it for me.
Caroline, thank you. And I found that really insightful in terms of what Atkins Realis is doing. And I think there's some really great tips there for other organisations that they can use to take forward in their own organisations. So thank you ever so much for sharing that with us. I'd like to invite back Daisy and Pip, and we are going to start with doing a few interactive questions with you out there. You have the Slido joining link again now, which you can use the QR code to get into, or you can do it on your computer by going to slido.com and typing in the number on the bottom of the screen there. So to start with, what we're going to do is, audience, you can interact with this, but at the same time, we're going to ask the question to our speakers and they can be answering while you're answering. So what unique challenges do neurodivergent women in STEM face? So I'd like to go to let's go to Pip first. I think with your personal experience, what did you find which was maybe significant to you in terms of the challenges you faced?
Well, I talked before a bit about diagnosis, and I think that is a real barrier. I think it does give you the confidence when you have a diagnosis to go and think more, to really believe you have a particular condition and delve into the details of what you need to support you. But there is a big gender bias between how people are diagnosed, with a very traditional sense of more young boys basically being diagnosed than women, and ADHD presents differently in women, and I don't think that's necessarily, this specifically for ADHD, but I don't necessarily think that's totally understood. Women tend to be hyperactive internally, so we saw the video, so in your head, whereas males tend to be more outwardly hyperactive, so it is a bit different to diagnose. And I think there's a lot of coexisting conditions as well. So anxiety, depression, eating disorders that are higher in women than men. So again, there's a lot of misdiagnosis when only maybe the secondary condition is kind of treated. I think another barrier is around communication styles. If women are very direct, they tend to be perceived as quite rude, whereas in men they're kind of seen as being authoritarian and kind of accepted or even rewarded. So I think that's a challenge too. And then masking. I mean, for me, this has been a huge impact on my life, and I think I'm an expert masker. I'm not sure that's a good thing. But it's really exhausting doing that all the time. And I think I'm able to present myself quite confidently, but I think I always have that fear, and I'm not doing quite as much as I should be, or as well as I should be. And I think that comes from being told I was lazy, maybe in earlier life, and that's had quite a long-term impact on me to think, oh, maybe I should be trying harder. And that's linked to other things associated with ADHD, such as perfectionism, being a people pleaser, those sorts of things. So I think all those things really impact on women generally in the workplace.
I absolutely relate to some of those, especially the masking side of things. Just to say, I don't think our answers are coming through from our audience here, because I've just tried to answer and none of them have come through. So yeah, I don't know whether our team in the background might be able to work out what's going on there. But I'll go over to Caroline now. If you could answer in terms of a organisation and your network perspective, what have you found have been the challenges of neurodivergent women, and if there's any specifics to STEM, that would be interesting to know.
I don't think there is anything to play more on than on what Pip said from an organisational perspective. I do really feel like there's a lot of, as I said, there's a lot of stigma associated with neurodivergence still that I think we are rapidly breaking down, which is great. But it's that quick to judge sort of scenario of, there's fewer females diagnosed with neurodivergence because they're better at masking, and not going back and looking at the data. And it's, what's the measurement data that we're assessing people on? Is it very male biased, the kind of basic data to begin with? So I think from a network perspective, from an organizational perspective, we haven't really focused differently on genders, I will admit. But I do see the challenges, and as Pip articulated, as to the wider challenges, wider cultural challenges that are different between females and males.
Great. Daisy, did you have anything to add to this one?
Well, I think they've covered that really, really well. But yeah. I think that, so just to add to that, I think examples in the media have also been quite negative, really, in the past. I think they're getting better, but I think they've reinforced some stereotypes to the general population, and they're often quite extreme examples, which isn't necessarily very helpful. Obviously, those extreme examples do exist in real life, maybe not exactly as they're being presented, but there are also sort of different presentations that we don't see. And I think maybe a lot of women have seen these perceptions and thought, that's not my experience, so that's not me. But then actually when they learn more about what it actually means to be neurodivergent as a woman, they realise that actually that is my experience, but I don't relate to this. And again, it sort of builds on what Pip and Caroline have said about it being all very male dominated and how we've looked at it in the past. And just to sort of echo what Pip said about gender stereotypes, in our neurodiversity research, we actually held a focus group so we did some intersectional focus groups where we looked at just women, neurodivergent women in STEM, and that actually came up. One of the ladies said that people see her as abrupt and argumentative, and she's wondering if that's because she doesn't fit the stereotype of what a woman should be in the workplace. So yeah, so really just to echo what they both said, but I think it's a challenge. There's a lot more to do, but it is getting better.
Just to add that a comment from Ross and from our audience is that lack of female neurodiverse role models in the workplace as well. So yeah, that's a great point too. I think we'll go on to our next question, please, Charmaine. Oh, look, there we go. There's all our answers. So yeah, masking there seems to be the main answer that's coming from our audience. And yeah, we've got struggle, lack of role models there. Great, thanks, Shamne. We can go on to the next one. Thank you. So what adjustments and other kinds of support does your organisation offer neurodivergent women at work? So Caroline, I know you've covered a lot of this already. I don't know whether you want to say what the main one, the most important one you think is in that area.
Oh, can I do two? One,
yeah.
I would say, because it's a recommendation for people, because it's open for everyone, and it's just a sort of direction we point people in, is the government access to work scheme. So you don't have to have a diagnosis to access the access to work scheme, and yet you will have access to experts who can talk you through your own personal sort of what we call, and I don't know if it's from them, a personal passport. So what are your personal needs in the workplace? And then you can take that back to your workplace organisation to kind of say, because of my experiences, because of my personal traits, these are the adjustments I might need. Because I would say that's probably where a lot of organisations who are not focused on not 100% focused on neurodivergence will struggle, is that if you went to them and said, I am autistic, or I think I'm autistic, or I'm just been diagnosed as autistic, they might say, great, what do you need? And obviously at that point, not everybody knows. People need a bit of exploration time to really be able to identify what they need in the workplace. So I'd highly recommend the access to work approach. Another one I would say is flexibility, and this probably comes into play with women particularly because we tend to take up flexible working patterns more than men do. I mean, I'm probably saying that quite judgmentally. I don't have the data to back that up, but my impression from my personal experience is that women do it more than men. I think utilising flexible working more is a great way for neurodivergent people to feel a bit more comfortable and excel in the workplace. If you think of commuting during rush hour as an example, you can often end up then arriving at work completely exhausted. Playing back to Daisy's video earlier on of the lady on the train. So if you can take that journey to work at a quieter time when it plays on those sort of challenges a little less, then that will help you once you're there. So flexible working, I would say, is possibly one of the biggest supports, biggest adjustments.
Fantastic, thanks Caroline. I'm just looking at the comments on screen as well. So mental health first aiders to signpost support, also another great suggestion there. Do you want to add anything, Daisy? Thinking from your organisation perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, aside from sort of the general adjustments, like things like noise cancelling headphones and things that we can offer colleagues, we published a reasonable adjustments toolkit, which is basically designed to help managers, really enable managers to easily get their team the support that they need. But we do a lot of awareness spreading. We're very vocal about neurodiversity. For Neurodiversity Celebration Week, we held a session sort of like this, talking about neurodiversity, which was actually really well attended. So that was really encouraging to see. And we often post and signpost on our internal intranet, and we share personal stories from colleagues who are very kindly open to sharing that, and that is hugely influential. We get I think people seeing the real stories and relating to those is so powerful. And we've also got obviously our employee network, which is a great place for people to meet other like-minded people with similar experiences. But just the point on flexibility is a huge one. I think, like, being able to be flexible and also treating people as individuals and as adults, and understanding that people, you don't need to patronize. We don't, just because we're different doesn't mean we're worse. Treat people as individuals. Know that they know their own mind and they know how they work best, and listen to them. Really listen to these individuals. So that's really what we try and do, and really try and enable line managers to have that confidence when managing someone who's neurodivergent. because that's really important, and that's something we hear quite a lot, is that managers lack the confidence. So that's something we're going to focus on this year as well, is really growing that, so that everyone feels comfortable and happy and safe at work. Yeah, I think that's probably it from me.
Fantastic. Pip, did you have anything to add to this one?
Well, I've just posted in the chat. It's really interesting because I found what adjustments do you need really challenging to think about and respond to. I think, yeah, because you don't really know what tools are out there, so having that kind of guidance and is really helpful.
That's a great suggestion. I'm exactly the same. I've been asked many times, what do you need? And I'm like, I have no idea. Spell check is kind of always what I end up saying. Yes, fantastic. So can we move on to the next question, please, Charmaine? So this is a bit more specific, relating to what Pip was touching on earlier. So how have hormonal changes affected how you, friends, family or colleagues experience neurodivergent symptoms? So there's a few options here. There's a no and don't know at the bottom there, if those suit too. But we've got puberty, menstrual cycle, pregnancy, postpartum, perimenopause, and menopause. Yeah, audience, you can answer that. But Pip, did you want to give us a little bit more insight into your experience relating to this?
Yes, and this is, I've sort of mentioned it, but I think hormones have played a big impact in exacerbating some of my ADHD symptoms. And I mean, I think there's a lot of kind of medical misogyny. I stole that term. I quite like it. Which means there's a real lack of data and information, even from some professionals, trained psychiatrists, about the impacts of hormones on women and girls. And I've got some statistics, actually, because I love a statistic. This is from a study, so one of the few studies that showed that 45% of there was a 45% prevalence of PMDD, which is the sort of severe form of premenstrual syndrome, or PMS. So 45% in ADHD women compared to 28.7% in non-ADHD women. So that's quite a significant difference. And also postpartum depression. So there was 57.6% of women with ADHD compared to around 15-20% of general female population has post pregnancy depression, basically. So there's some really stark findings, and I think it's something to be really aware of. Like I said before, these are times where you often feel you're most vulnerable, so being able to make decisions and help yourself, or feel like you have got a route to go down, is really important. There is some research on estrogen and progesterone and the impact that has. There's some research on for ADHD. I think it's also similar for other conditions as well, that actually the change in hormones has a big impact. So it's not just the hormones that impact you, but it's trying to regulate going through a change. So puberty, often symptoms are worse. Perimenopause, pregnancy, and postpartum.
Fantastic. Thank you for that insight. And yeah, that's being perimenopausal myself. That's something that I've started to think about, whether that's relating to my symptoms, and not something I'd thought of before. But yes, it's very interesting area.
Just to add a bit to that, I think one of the big issues is that you're either seen by a menopause person or a neurodivergent specialist, and it's only starting. There are very few people, but there are a few if you delve into the literature where they're looking at those two things together. And I think that's probably the same for a lot of other so we talked about anxiety, OCD. I think a lot of that intersectionality between conditions and getting the right experts talking to each other to help you is really challenging. And I think you just have to, it's hard when you're in a vulnerable position, but you have to really believe and trust your gut and your instincts, and try and push to get the information you need.
Can I come in there, because you asked about reasonable adjustments earlier, and Pip's just triggered a thought for me, actually, is the offering of neurodivergent specialist counselling. That actually it's quite hard, as you said there, Pip, to get the two experts together, a counsellor and someone who understands about neurodivergence. And so being able to offer neurodivergent specialist counselling really works for people, because then you're not having to explain to them what your neurodivergence is and how it's impacting you. I mean, you're obviously from the personal level, yes, but from a medical level, no.
That's a fantastic point. Thank you for adding that in.
I can on this particular question though, I've had very recently some of my people in my close circle at the onset of menstruation really finding that puberty really challenging, and for not immediately understanding that there was a neurodivergent element related to it. And you go back then to the fact that there were late diagnoses, so they haven't been diagnosed in their early years with neurodivergence, and then at the onset of puberty they've had real mental challenges, and both strangely to do with intrusive thoughts, which is where you can't necessarily clearly distinguish between reality and fiction. So yeah, I really fully believe, having had those two experiences, that there's a huge link between neurodivergence and change in hormone levels, or even when we're talking about the onset of puberty, it's brain growth and brain changes. Yeah, I'd like to spend some time, if I could, advocating for more studies in that area, because it's really important.
Yeah, hoping that to watch this space, and this will really develop, and research will begin to give us a bit more light in this area to enable how we can understand ourselves and what we're experiencing as we go through life as women. Excellent. Let's move on to our next question. I realise we're running out of time, and I want to make sure there's enough time for people to ask questions to you all. So these not going to be interactive. These are just simply going to be for our panel to answer. So, how do you support neurodivergent colleagues? I think we've already covered that one, actually. Let's go down more to the that one's been covered as well. So if people are worried about saying the wrong thing, what are your views about the current use of inclusive language for neurodivergent conditions, and what's the best way of addressing this? So Caroline, I know you had a quote that you wanted to use to answer this. So I think that might be on our next slide, which we can bring up, hopefully. If you want to talk through what this is.
So this is a quote I came across shortly after the George Floyd incident, and it was from an Embrace document, so a different sort of minority inclusion group. I'm going to read it out to you, just for those people who might not appreciate me having put lots of words on a page. But when interacting with people who are different, it's common to feel anxiety about using the right words. And I'm butt in here. Who of us hasn't felt that in some kind of scenario, right? We just don't necessarily know if we're saying the wrong thing, and so we don't say anything at all. Or fear causing offence or being accused of bias. This fear means we are more likely to hold back and maintain a distance, which impacts on the quality of the conversation and the level of trust. the more concerned we are about making a mistake, the more we retreat into our own in-group, and the more likely we are to notice information that confirms our biases. So then you would think the opposite is true. Let's not be afraid to make mistakes, and let's not judge people for making those mistakes. Let's point the mistakes out, let's accept them, learn from them, and continue that discussion. So that a great example for me would be, over the last few years, the difference between where we use the word neurodiverse and neurodivergent. And I think that's become more, people are more conscious about the distinction between neurodiverse and neurodivergent now, and that's only through people having tried it, tested it, got it wrong, people pointing it out. So that's my thoughts on the question.
Fantastic, thank you. Pip, do you want to come in with your ideas relating to this, as with the experience of being a neurodivergent person?
I think, there's not much more to add, but just I think generally we need to get comfortable with feeling uncomfortable and questioning and being curious about these things, because I think sort of in similar light to Caroline's quote, there's sometimes a reluctance to go and talk to someone openly about something if you don't know very much about it. So I think, have the confidence to feel uncomfortable and learn.
Fantastic, thank you. Daisy, did you have any thoughts on this one?
I can just very quickly add, the thing is, you can learn everything online about what the right words to use are, but language is so personal, so what might be right for someone might not be right for the other person. So really the best thing you can do is approach them with humility and say, look, I want to learn more, I don't know, can you help me? And oftentimes if you do that, people aren't going to come, they're just pleased you want to know more, they're just pleased you want to learn. So you're not going to be met with aggression, hopefully. Very unlikely that you'd be met with aggression. I think people would just be happy that you're interested and want to learn, and you don't have to know everything straight away, no one does. So just keep that in mind, everyone starts from somewhere.
Fantastic. We did zoom over one of the questions which I think we haven't answered, which is, what advice do you have for those who have recently been diagnosed as neurodivergent and are starting their journey, which might enable them to access the right support? So, Caroline, did you want to step in here?
I've got 3 words: disclose, disclose, and disclose. That's it for me. Is just don't be afraid of it. I'm really quite confident now that we're in a different world to the world that we were in 3 or 4 years ago, and I know that people's experiences still hurt, because I know that when people have come across personal challenges with having disclosed, it cuts deep and it lasts a long time. So, but I've seen the change that's happened over the last few years. I really hope that people will have the bravery to try again.
Yeah, I know throughout my career I found it very, I've done a lot of masking and I've done a lot of hiding of work because of embarrassment and because of stigma, and it does take something of a mindset change to make yourself say, actually, I'm dyslexic. If I'm sharing my screen and there's a word that's spelt wrong, please just point it out to me, because that will help me. And yeah, I think there is a kind of need to sort of have ownership of who you are. It's a part of you, and that's okay. And people can't understand and help and support unless you share your experience with them. Daisy, would you like to give your insight into this one?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, what I would say is I completely agree with disclosure. That is really important. But just go and find your people. Like you've felt different your whole life probably, and you've probably felt very isolated. And now you've got a label essentially, but you know now you're not alone. Go find those people. They could be online, in networks. Just do what you can, even if you're just watching videos online of people who've been diagnosed with something similar. Hearing those experiences will literally change. It will change your life, and you won't feel alone. own, and you'll know that you're not the only person who thinks that way, and that is so validating and so amazing. So I think that's what I would suggest, is that the first thing I would do is go find your team, go find your group, go find your people who understand what you've been going through and who can help you continue through life.
Great advice. Pip, from someone that's been through this, that's done the disclosure. So, what are your thoughts in terms of how that could be made easier for people?
Yeah, I think so. Probably two things. I think focus on your strengths. I think I really do believe now, looking back, that the sort of successes I've had in my career are because of my neuro differences and not despite of them, and think about the changes you want to make in your life and your career to feed into them, to your strengths, and not having to do many things that you find challenging. And then the second thing is probably a little bit hypocritical, is that if you the waiting list for diagnosis is so long now, and I feel that is really overwhelming and challenging for people. So if you think you have a neurodivergent condition, just really believe it and take the actions that you would do if you had a formal diagnosis, and come at it from that angle, because the waiting lists are absolutely ridiculous. And it's particularly if you've had that change in from maybe a hormonal change that meant your symptoms are particularly acute, or then you really need to believe it and take some actions, because you can't wait 4 years.
Yeah, that is great advice. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so I think we will go to the audience now for questions and see if we have any Q&A questions in. Oh, back one. you can join using the link again. Ask your questions in the Q&A chat. And if you have any questions for our panel, you can ask. You can also, we should be unlocking your access to your sound and microphones any minute now. You can also put your hand up and ask a question directly to our panel about anything that they've been speaking about today. I'm just trying to log in to see whether there are any questions coming up. Can we go to the next slide and see what questions we have, or if you want to post them in the chat, you certainly can. Oh, it's not coming up.
That is the only side, and I'm not sure what's happening, so it might be better if people post in the chat.
Okay, sorry, we're having Slido issues today. If you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat, or put your hand up, and we can unlock your sound and video, and you can ask it in person. I think it's gone a bit silent. Is there any questions between? So if there was one key support that you would say to organisations that they should offer. So we've done what individuals should do. What would you say was the best way of enabling awareness, I guess, amongst organisations about how to support or maybe be an ally for neurodivergent colleagues? Do you have any advice around, I guess, raising awareness and enabling individuals to be more supportive colleagues to neurodivergent people within the workplace? Maybe Caroline, you happy to answer that one?
I will answer your question. So what I was thinking of an answer as you said it, and now it's throwing me out of my mind. Remind me, what support should we give people?
So how can we enable allies to be more effective?
Well, someone mentioned earlier about mental health first aiders. Mental health first aiders is something that we've had for quite a long time in the organisation, and people kind of know how they work. They're not mental health specialists or practitioners in supporting you with your own mental health in any way. They are people who are well informed of what services we provide and what services are out there in the general ether for supporting people with mental health challenges, and perhaps focusing people on areas that they think might be particularly helpful for them. We are running a program now of developing the same for neurodivergent specialists. So neurodivergent first aiders, I think, is potentially what we're calling them. We might still work on the title, but just as to point us towards that access to work program, for example, points towards our employee assistance program, which also doesn't only offer neurodivergent specialist counselling, but also offers for training, neurodivergent specialist training to be brought in to be targeted at particular teams if that's what's required. We also have obviously a reasonable adjustments process, and different people would have asked for different reasonable adjustments at certain times. So those neurodivergent first aiders will be supporting people in finding out what is available to them for support. So that's probably the biggest thing that we're implementing at the moment to support our neurodivergent colleagues better.
Fantastic, thank you. Daisy, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I can do. I think the main thing really is just talking about it and make sure that you're celebrating those awareness days. You're creating this culture of openness. If you can encourage colleagues to share their story and be open and be advocates, then that would be fantastic. Obviously, you don't want to put pressure on people if they don't want to, but that's that disclosure part that that can be really important, to know that there's someone out there who's like you. So I would say, yeah, really talk about it. Make sure you are being very vocal, celebrating those awareness days. And I think just ensuring, again, it's about line managers, I think, having that confidence, which I sort of talked about earlier, making sure that management understand that people think differently and know how to manage that essentially in the most effective way. I think those are the most important. So I would say, to summarize, I would say talking about it, celebrating it, but training your line managers as well.
Fantastic. And Pip, do you, in terms of kind of allyship, have you ever experienced anyone that's been an ally to you and supported you within your journey and how have they gone about that, and was it a good experience? I suppose would be good to know.
I think I think allies are really, really important. I think that it is. And I think the neurodiversity network actually is in Atkins has been really helpful in creating that wider awareness, and I think it is important for. I think this alludes to what Daisy was saying, that other people understand the strengths and also the challenges that come with neurodiversity. So it does need to be a broader program, and I think. Changing the culture in organisations is really important. Probably Caroline has been a great ally for me, actually. Just even probably 5-6 years ago, I probably wouldn't have even said I was dyslexic in a work environment, and being felt like I was supported by the organisation. The first thing I did, I wrote a blog article that was on our intranet, and I found it really hard, and I was so nervous about it. And taking that first step and feeling supported to do that was really helpful for me.
It was a brilliant article,
and now I'm very
proud. Great example of role modelling.
Fantastic, love it. Well, that's great. We've got one question actually in the chat here. If you believe you're neurodivergent without a formal diagnosis, should you still expect support from your organisation?
Absolutely, 100%, without a doubt. Yes.
Yeah.
There's just nothing to. I'll give you an example. Someone phoned me up a few years ago who had a person within his team who was struggling on site because he had sensory sensitivities to noise, and the site that he was working on was particularly noisy. He was diagnosed as autistic. We had a discussion around what sort of reasonable adjustments could be put in place, and this individual was going straight for having noise cancelling headphones, which I'll speak to that challenge in a moment. There's no reason why we would provide noise cancelling headphones to him because he was autistic, and not noise cancelling headphones to someone who was struggling with noise on site who was not autistic. Like, it just makes no sense. So we've got to look at the challenge and help people overcome the challenge regardless of the diagnosis. On that point around noise cancelling headphones, we try and treat issues like that a bit like PPE. We use PPE on sites as the last line of defence against a hazard. That actually the first line of defense is, do we need to be exposed to that hazard in the first place? So actually the first question should be, does he have to be on site? Not, whilst he's on site, can we give him noise cancelling headphones? And actually the answer to that question was no. So the reasonable adjustment we made was to allow him to work elsewhere.
Yeah.
Just thought that was worth mentioning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Look for the need. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much, Daisy, Pip, and Caroline for joining us and sharing your wealth of experience. You've shared lots of additional resources and insights that we will share with the audience here today and with our WISE members in our resource area. We thank you very much for joining us. I'm just going to do a very quick overview of our up and coming events and give you insight into what's coming up in the WISE events calendar. So we have on the 4th of June our Building Tomorrow's Workforce, the Power of STEM outreach. We've also got on the 2nd of July Combating Sexual Harassment in the Workplace, which is one of our in-person events. So that's an exciting opportunity to network and have more knowledge of and experience of sharing your challenges and your successes in that area. We're also got one in September, Insightful Inclusion, Making EDI Data Standard Practice. So those are 3 coming up. And then if we go on to our next slide, our biggie is our conference, which is on the 30th of September, and we are going to be accelerating the pace of change. So our annual conference attracts leading organisations in the STEM sector to build inclusive practices to achieve gender parity in science, technology, engineering and maths. And you can go to our website to find out a little bit more information about that and what's coming up in the future, and you can register your interest to attend there too. So if we go to our next slide, we always need your feedback. So you can do this by getting in touch, or you can do it by doing participant feedback, which is also not working because Slido's just gone, hey, do Lally today. So apologies for that, but we will send you the link via email so you can give us your feedback. Your feedback means so much to us because it enables us to know whether we're doing these events right, if we are, meeting what your expectations of the event, and what we can do in the future in terms of specific areas. And I really do feel there might be one about hormones and neurodiversity that we might need to delve a little bit more into. So thank you again to our fantastic speakers. Really do appreciate you sharing all of your knowledge, and we look forward to seeing our WISE members at a future event. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.